Welcome to the Grandpa channel, where stories don't fade, they get recorded. I'm Steve Harris. My grandkids call me Rivers. This podcast is where grandpas and grandchildren pull up a chair, turn on a mic, and let her rip. Grandpa stories are chock full of wisdom, life lessons, and frankly funny as hell. Your stories are the magic elixir to help your grandkids navigate Mr. Toad's wild ride, aka life. Let's Grandpa. Listen up, grandpas. Have you actually pulled the trigger on recording your life story? I'm talking video, baby. They want to remember your corny jokes, your crooked smile, your rugged good looks, and the jaunty bounce of your voice. What if I told you there was a really easy way to do this? Recently, I sat down and I told my life story on video. Not the whole thing, but the good stuff, the messy stuff, the funny stuff, the parts I didn't want to forget, and the parts that I did not want my kids and my grandkids to forget. Planted Media made it so easy. They came to me, set up everything, and then they did some editing voodoo magic that made me look like $1,000,000. Go to plantedmediaco.com and tell them Rivers sent you, and you'll get a nice little Grandpa Channel discount. All right, back to the show. Hello and welcome to the Grandpa Channel. Today we have a really terrific guest, Jennifer Kaufman. She's a principal of an autistic school. She is the author of a book and has a website, and I'm really interested to find out what sort of ideas she has for grandfathers who have autistic grandchildren and how a novice like me, where I can be better around autistic kids. Welcome to the show. We have a vast following of about 87 people so far. We're getting bigger. We're getting bigger.
Good.
So anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of, the grandpa angle in all of this.
Sure. So I have been a school administrator, school principal for about 20 years, always working in special education. And I have found myself for the past 10 years or so working in a school, actually 2 schools with the focus on kids with autism. And I've always been like the professional sitting behind the desk, supporting our families and supporting our students and my staff. And then a few years ago, my then 3-year-old, now 7-year-old grandson was diagnosed with autism. And it really shifted the way I see what I do in my own life professionally and personally. And it was, a big eye-opening experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me to write a book, Grandparenting on the Spectrum. And and so here we are.
So how prevalent is autism?
So here in New Jersey, it's about 1 in 33. It's 1 in 36. Some chances are someone that has autism.
Yeah.
And there's a saying that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, meaning that it can look very different in each individual person.
So there's probably no scripted way to deal with autistic kids, I would imagine.
It's a very individualized kind of thing, and you have to look at your grandchild or whoever you're dealing with and look at what it is they need specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it might be a communication challenge. It might be a social interaction kind of deficit, and looking at what that is going to take to support that is really important.
How did you get to where you're at kind of career-wise? Did you start out thinking that you wanted to work with autistic kids, or did you just kind of fall into it a little bit?
I started out as an English teacher many years ago, and there were kids with special needs in my classes, and sometimes they would have the right kind of support, sometimes they did not. And I saw teachers struggling, and so watching teachers, including myself, struggle to find the right resources, that led me down the path to become a school administrator, because I wanted to really be able to create good school environments. And I just found myself gravitating towards special education and all that entailed. And so now here I find myself with worlds colliding, because I have all of this experience, but personally, I really haven't had anybody in my family with autism.
Until What are some general guidelines if you're a grandpa and you find yourself in a situation where you have autistic grandchildren? What are some things that you've learned, and how can I be better? How can we as grandpas be better with dealing with autistic kids, but specifically grandkids?
Sure. So this is really the basics of what I write about. And that is we come into grandparenting with all of this experience, right? We've been parents, we've raised our kids successfully to adulthood to the point that they've had their own children.
And they haven't become serial killers, right?
Right.
So,
Hopefully.
yeah, hopefully, at least right now. Yeah.
That I know of. You know, we entered into this with these expectations of what it's going to look like for us. We're going to be the ones that bring the knowledge and the wisdom. You might be thinking I'm going to be out in the backyard throwing a baseball with my grandchild. Sometimes that isn't always the case when a child has autism. And shifting those expectations is part of that wisdom that we as grandparents and grandfathers in particular need to bring to that experience. Shifting what our expectations are versus the reality of the situation, and adapting so that we can build relationships based on what is versus what our imagination would like it to be.
Have you had some situations that have both been really sad and really wonderful where you've seen the grandpas rise to the occasion in dealing with their autistic grandkids, or maybe getting better?
You know, it's interesting because I'm going to speak about my own husband because,
Please.
yeah, my daughter's from my first marriage. And so my husband doesn't have children and hasn't had that experience of raising children. So I see him going into this grandfather experience cold, like without all those resources, but watching him really immerse himself in wherever my grandson is at the time. So, we were just with him this weekend, and they have routines that they do, and they might do the same silly routine, throwing a blanket and catching or just doing something over and over and over again. And I watch his patience, and I watch the humor that he brings to it. I know that it is not easy because, now it's 2 or 3 days later and he's still complaining that his arm hurts from throwing something 5,000 times.
Yeah.
But, being that good sport and understanding that sometimes you have to play by the child's rules because the traditional rules aren't going to work.
Yeah. Wow. Do you find a lot of frustration with grandfathers or fathers dealing with their own children, that have, or is it something that gradually hopefully comes, and then they really rise to the occasion? I'm an optimistic person. I'd like to think that if I had that situation that I would rise to the occasion and maybe be exhausted by the end of a weekend.
I've spoken with grandfathers. One grandfather I'm thinking about in particular, who was talking to me about how thrown off and upset he was when the diagnosis was first made, and that he spent a year or so just worrying and wondering and fearful of like what's going to happen. And why isn't this kid meeting goals? Every other 4-year-old or 5-year-old is doing X, Y, and Z. Why isn't my grandson doing this? And we had a couple of conversations over the years, and it turned out that once he shifted those expectations and realized that this isn't a race to a common finish line, that this is a journey that individual child is on, cheering on all of the successes and looking at what is and what successes are happening is very different than being disappointed by what's not happening.
I think that would be a real challenge. It probably requires some humility on the part of the grandfather to kind of adapt to a situation that they hadn't anticipated, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But what kind of advice would you have for a grandfather who maybe it's becoming increasingly apparent that there's some autistic issues?
I think the best advice is to look to their adult children, the father or the mother of that child, to get the guidance as to what's going to work best.
Right, right.
We think of Think of our kids as like our kids always. I don't care that my daughter is 35. I still think of her as a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
I know better.
Yeah.
But that is not the case in this case. This is very, very different. And the parent is the one who is there day in and day out, though some parents do live with grandkids.
Yeah.
And they're the experts. And they have the resources. They hear from the teachers. They hear from the therapists about like what's going to work. And going to them and saying like, hey, do you have some suggestions for me? I don't understand what she's saying, or I don't understand what this is all about. What would you suggest? And deferring to a parent is super important.
And I would think too that grandparents and grandpas in particular could be a super big help for kids, for parents who have autistic children. And sometimes you're blessed to live really close to them, and sometimes you're not. What kind of long distance ideas might you have?
Sure. And I think that's a great question, Steve. I live about an hour and a half away from my own grandson, so I'm not seeing him every day, but I do interact with him every day. Through the pandemic, we all learned how to Zoom and Google Meet and all of that stuff.
Right.
And you can use those tools to read a book to them, to just say hello. I mean, it changes all the time with my own grandson because sometimes, like, he's looking for me. Other times, he's looking for grandpa, and he wants nothing to do with me. And, if grandpa's standing behind me, you see him looking and looking, and then let's just have special.
Yeah.
So using those tools as best as you can to that communication that's so important, whatever that communication looks like.
Describe some of the, maybe if you feel comfortable, describe what processes your husband went through to get to the point where he's numero uno in the world for your grandson. Did you luck into some things, or or is he just so incredibly wonderful that everybody just loves him?
Well, I would like to say that both my grandson and my husband are wonderful, and everybody loves them, both of them. But, it hasn't always been easy because there were times that my husband, like I said, didn't have children before and was sort of hands off and unsure how to approach this child who was very physical and a little unpredictable and could get angry. And I think that him taking a back seat and observing, sometimes communication and attachment can be shown by just a child coming to sit next to you, not necessarily like interacting with you, by allowing that space for the child to feel comfortable that somebody was there for them and really not demanding anything of them. Not saying you need to do this or you need to do that. Just making themselves available. And I think that's an important thing, particularly grandfathers, to remember, because grandfathers like to be very physical and roughhouse and, get involved in that way. And that can be, but it has to be on the child's timetable.
I would think that your suggestion to go to the parents and just say, what are my avenues to approach and how can I deepen my relationship with my grandson or my granddaughter? I think that would be, I think sometimes grandpas come in with guns blazing. And I guess that is a question of how do you know that you're succeeding as a grandpa with an autistic child?
So you get the signs, and it might take a while to develop that and to learn to notice those signs. A grandpa that comes in is like, hey, how are you? And, wants to give a hug and wants to start roughhousing. It can be a little much for a child who has sensory issues because it just seems overwhelming. And the reaction could be a negative reaction because they are not ready for somebody to come and touch them or hug them or roughhouse with them. I think it really is so important for grandpas to take it slow and to read the room. And like you said, and like I said, to ask for suggestions. Like, what's he doing this week? Because it can change from week to week and month to month.
Yes, it could. Is that what happens? Is it doesn't stay in a steady kind of, or I guess it could, but...
It could depend upon the weather outside. It could depend upon developmental stages. They could have been up all night. And so when they're coming to your house, maybe they're particularly tired and they just need some quiet time. It's an ever-changing situation. And as the elders in the family, understanding that in our wisdom, we're going to take a step back and we're going to just read the room and observe what's going on.
Maybe that's the wisdom, is to step back and try to read the room. And then maybe you get some help on reading the room from parents. I would imagine, Jennifer, that you spend a lot of time talking with parents of autistic kids. And are they frustrated? Or, I mean, do you try to talk them off the ledge a little bit? Or, what are you finding with people who have autistic kids?
I think that our parents, particularly at my school, are very grateful that we're providing the support that we are to their children. Can be frustrating. Parenting in general can be very frustrating, right?
Yeah.
And you throw autism into the mix where there's those communication issues, those social issues, and it can be even more challenging. And remember this, and grandpa should remember this particularly. Our children, our adult children, they're getting suggestions and advice, wanted and unwanted, from everyone from the grocery store cashier to their teachers and the therapists and the person down the block and the next door neighbor. Everybody's got to put their 2 cents in.
Yeah.
So the last person that they need to be told, well, you really should be doing X, Y, and Z.
I've read this, or yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes if I have information to pass along, because I have at my disposal, like the advice of all sorts of experts in the field. And sometimes what I'll just do is put together a little email and send an article, and I'll just say, hey, take what you like and leave the rest. And then I don't ask about it again because, I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
I don't want to say, did you read it? Well, did you read it? And what did you think?
No quizzes, right?
Right, no quizzes. Exactly.
Now, autism, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a spectrum. Is that a good way of saying it or not a good way of saying it?
It is a spectrum. I like to sort of say it's not like having a computer that's broken. It's like having a completely different operating system.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. And when we talk about a spectrum, it presents itself different in every person. And it really depends on the amount of support that person needs in order to be independent in their life. So, if communication is an issue, an individual might have different ways to communicate. It might not be verbal communication. It might be an iPad, a tablet that has icons on it for them to communicate what they want or what they need. It might be a picture system where they're pointing at pictures to show what they want. And again, those things will change and develop over the years as a child becomes, develops and grows, and things change.
If you could change, as you've observed, as the grandmother of an autistic child, but especially as a principal of a school, if you could change some ways that people think about autism or deal with autistic kids, what would you mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that autism is not something that needs to be fixed. It's not damage. It's not.
But I'm a male, Jennifer. I got to fix things.
Gotta fix it. You've got to fix it. No,
Yeah.
We can fix ourselves in how we respond to people with autism, but our goal is not to fix people who have autism.
Yeah.
Sometimes the people that I meet who have autism, they live in the moment, which so many of us should do. If they don't like you, they will let you know. If they didn't want to do something, they will not do it. Yeah. There are a lot of lessons that typical people could take from people with autism, because they definitely live in the moment. They're not worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. They're looking at what's going on right around them at the moment.
If you could build a prototypical, not a robot, but if you could build a prototypical, fantastic grandfather for autistic grandchildren, what pieces would you cobble together for that?
I think that patience and a sense of humor, and an understanding that whatever you think is going to be, it may be very different. And I'll give you an example.
Yeah, please.
A couple of weeks ago, I said to my husband, hey, our grandson is able to count money, count coins, no coins and the value of coins. And he was like, come on, you really think so? said, well, this is what I've been told, and I'm going to believe that he can do this. He knows his coins. He can identify his coins. He's 7 years old. That's a pretty, typical thing for a 7-year-old to do. And we were with him this weekend, and I took out a handful of coins, and I got sort of the skeptical look from Grandpa. And I put them out on the table, and I said, hey, what's this? And my grandson responded, penny. And then what's this? A nickel, a quarter. And he knew his coins.
Did he? Huh?
Yes. And I think that was one of those situations where don't underestimate what you think they know, because they know much more. And just because they're not communicating regularly about topics that, we might be communicating about, they still have that information inside of them.
Mm-hmm.
They hear everything.
Yeah, this is something I'm working on. I have more patience now than I did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I want you to tell me about your book and tell me how you decided to write the book, and then kind of just tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, I decided to write the book not only because I myself am a grandparent, but I also see grandparents occasionally in IEP meetings or new students in our school. The parents are very excited. They bring their parents with them. And I saw grandparents either shutting down and not being part of the process, or they would be too much a part of the process and feel they needed to interject all of the information and everything that they know into it. And so I thought that I would write a book from my perspective to try to support this. I include information about, holidays. How do you have Thanksgiving when you have a child that doesn't want to eat turkey? Right? Mm-hmm. What do you do? Hey, our tradition is we open up gifts on Christmas Eve, and everybody gets, it goes around the room. Everybody gets a gift to open up. Well, what if your grandchild isn't a gift opener? He doesn't like wrapped gifts. What do you do? Mm-hmm. It's having that patience to find alternative ways to do things and know that, hey, sometimes it's okay to eat chicken fingers and French fries for Thanksgiving dinner. Because it's not about the turkey. It's about everybody being together. Sometimes sitting at the table is too difficult, and maybe just walking around the room is okay. It's shifting those expectations and looking at what's really important.
Sounds like you got to be open to, when that gets into expectation levels, they've got to change. I played a lot of baseball when I was a kid, and just the idea that a grandchild that doesn't want to throw a football around or a baseball, that's kind of hard, but I got to get over that. And I've got to find ways to connect. And I think really, aren't we really talking about connection?
Sure.
There's a reason we call this the Grandpa Channel, because I think grandpas have a lot more they got to work on than grandmas. Grandmas seem to have most grandmas just have this natural sort of, winning ways, through food or through love or through craft projects and stuff like that.
Well, it's very sweet of you to say that. But I'll give you another example.
Sure.
We have this really cool little train set, and I think my husband and I bought it years ago in anticipation, like he's going to play with these little trains and put them on the track, and this is going to be fantastic.
Yeah. He
wasn't interested in this thing at all for a couple of years. But, we persisted. We'd leave it out. Maybe he'd look at it, maybe not. And then it evolved into him taking the trains and sort of lining them up on the carpet and not putting them on the track, just like lining them up in certain ways or using them and putting them against his cheek to feel how they felt.
Really?
Not playing with it like we wanted him to play with it. Grandpa wanted the trains on the track, being pushed around. And then those pieces all over the floor evolved into Grandpa saying to him, hey, let's clean up all those pieces. And the two of them would clean up the pieces and put them away. And then on that, one morning, we saw him and he was taking like one of the trains and putting it on the track, taking it off the track, putting it on the track, pushing it around a little bit. And now I go over and Grandpa's playing with him and they've got trains all over the track. And it's not the way Grandpa imagined it would be at first, but persistence and patience and working with what the child wants to do and where they're at and meeting them where they're at is really super important.
Your husband sounds like a great guy.
is the guy.
I love the idea of learning, and learning to do things differently and learning to adapt. I mentioned to you before we started that I have this terrific brother-in-law who has got about 2 or 3 grandkids, who one in particular has very severe autistic characteristics. And he has taught these grandkids how to snow ski.
Sure.
And I've had people describe how some of them were wailing, like, I don't want to do this, and my brother-in-law he's magic. And he's kind of a gruff guy, in some ways, but with these grandkids, it's just like, I love that. And I think that we as grandpas, we have the ability more than we think we do to really connect with different types of kids. And I hope that that's the case. One of the things that I think is that each grandpa has a superpower, and I wonder, I wonder if my brother-in-law has this wonderful superpower of how to connect with his autistic grandchildren, which, wow, what a gift. And if you have superpowers, then that probably means you have some kryptonite problems. But,
I'm sure, I'll jump in and say that I am sure that that relationship was built over time.
yes, yeah.
And I also think it's never too late to adjust your sails and start working on the relationship.
I love the idea of adjusting our sails. I just think that this what you're talking about, Jennifer, is so important. I think that I'm a little shy sometimes in some situations where I might not reach out, and I think I need to have more courage to, try to engage and more people. And Grandpa, where you're planted, that's one of the themes that we have. Do you have like any closing sort of things that you want to say? And then what comes to your mind?
So this is something that I always say in every interview and podcast that I do. And that is, and it's not the most pleasant topic, but out of all of the accidental deaths among people with autism, children with autism in particular, 93% of those accidental deaths involve water. Yeah. So as a grandparent, the best gift that you can provide to your grandchild, if they do not already have it, are autism-friendly swimming lessons.
Wow. Okay.
Those kids waterproofed. So if there is an accident, people with autism are drawn to the water, many of them. And it be that a swimming pool, a lake, a river, an ocean, and giving them those tools so that if they find themselves drawn to the water, in the water, they're able to keep themselves afloat and get themselves to shore, or at least tread water until somebody comes to help them. I think that is what I try to say in every podcast, because if it saves one kid, then it saves one kid,
Oh, that's a great idea. Any other things that kind of pop out of your mind thinking about? You're an advocate for autistic kids. I'm sure you feel that.
Yeah, I think grandfathers, grandpas, if they have the resources, autism is a very expensive endeavor. And there are therapies and speech, OT, PT, horse therapy, water, swimming lessons, all sorts of expenses. And often parents don't feel comfortable saying like, hey, we're really struggling here because of all of these additional expenses. I think offering to cover some of those costs would be tremendous for the families. And, I'm sure adult children would be very appreciative. So, keeping that in mind is never a bad idea.
Great idea. Yeah, great idea. Tell us, do you have a website?
Yes, my website is Grandparenting on the Spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
That's all .com. That's also the name of my book, Grandparenting on the Spectrum. It's available on Amazon. And, here in northern New Jersey and other places in the country, I go and I speak to grandparent groups, just like I'm speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I've learned a ton just listening to you. And I can feel your goodness and your heart as it relates to autistic kids, and having some sympathy too as a grandma for grandpas and grandmas. I love being a grandpa, but I also want to be a better grandpa. And you've helped give me a lot of ideas how to be a better grandpa. So thank you very much.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this platform.
And this is the end of our episode today. We're really grateful for Jennifer, and buy her book and tell people who maybe have autistic children and grandchildren about what she's doing. And so that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. Leave a review, share it with a friend, or better yet, tell your favorite grandpa. We're on a mission to gather 1 million grandpas, storytellers, wisdom keepers, and lovable wild cards. Until next time, keep the mic hot, the memories fresh, and the jokes just slightly inappropriate. I'm out of here.